All right. We'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to today's Community Redevelopment Agency Advisory Board meeting. If you wish to address the board regarding an item listed on the agenda, please complete a registration form at the rear of the room and place it in the speaker request box located on the dais prior to consideration of that item. We ask the speakers limit their comments to 3 minutes and that large groups name a spokesperson whenever possible. Thank you for your interest and participation in city government. So, roll call.
Member Asgar. Member Dominic.
Here.
Vice Chair Dondeville.
Here.
Member Fouchon. Member Levy.
Here.
Member Palmer.
Here.
Chair Frederickson.
Here.
Thank you.
So we're going to set the agenda. I had one item that I was going to ask that we move item 7A. I would motion to move that item 7A to follow item 10A. So basically the last discussion of our meeting.
I'll second that motion. Or you're making a motion, so I can second it.
Sure.
I second that motion.
Should I just do an all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right. So public comment. Do we have any public comment not specific to any items on this agenda? Doesn't look like it. All right. Approval of minutes. So I'll entertain a motion, or if we have any comments on the minutes.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of the March 28th and the May 23rd meetings that have been submitted, and I think we've all had a chance to read them.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? All right, minutes pass. So that brings us to our first item, 5A.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and CRAB members. Anita Jenkins, CRA Administrator for the record. This morning we have a public hearing item before you. And the title of the public hearing is a resolution determining on-street parking in D Downtown Petition 22 PDWN1 for the allocation of 3 on-street parking spaces south of Central Avenue in the D Downtown Zoning District for the property located at 1200 Central Avenue. And with us today, we have a petitioner that will make a presentation to you, and then we have our expert witness, Leslie Dolmer, on behalf of staff that will go through the petition for you. This is a quasi-judicial hearing, so all of our experts will be sworn in, and then they will offer you evidence. When you consider that evidence, we will be asking you for a motion at the end of your consideration to either approve, make a recommendation to City Council to approve the on-street parking allocation, approve with conditions, or deny the application. If you make a motion or recommendation to deny that, then you need to have justification for that. So with that, I have laid out in your AGM the process that we will go through this morning. And before we begin with that process, do you all have any questions? This may be your first opportunity to hear an item like this. It is required by the code for this allocation to come to CRAB, and then it'll go to City Council with your recommendation. And before we ask the petitioner to begin with their presentation, I just want to make sure that you all understand the process that we'll be going through.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Has this gone in front of, let's say, the Planning Advisory Board or the Design Review Board?
The specific parking allocation by the code comes to CRAB because it is in the redevelopment area. The code was written for this recommendation to become to you and then to City Council. So it is, it's a different step in the process. Generally, quasi-judicial items do go before the PAB, the Planning Advisory Board, but the code requires this one because it is on-street parking allocation to come before the CRAB. So that's just the nuance of the code of how it's written. So it does not go before the PAB. It comes to you for your recommendation to City Council.
Have there been other buildings that have made such a request within the CRA that would have come to us?
So this isn't specifically a building application, it's a parking allocation application. But I understand, and I'll let Leslie expand on this, but I understand there have been some parking allocations that have come before the CRAB back in 2018, 2019 timeframe.
Okay,
So
that answers
they
my
have-
question then. Thank you.
I will just add from a procedural perspective, Anita did a great job in laying out what the process is in the memorandum that you got, and it follows the procedures that are in your procedural rules, which are typically followed by others. Your involvement after witnesses are sworn in is really the ex parte disclosures, and I know some of you have been involved in other quasi-judicial matters, so you're familiar with it, but I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
And let me add to that on your ex parte. What that means is if you've been to the site and you've had a site visit, you need to let us know that. If you have spoke with the applicant or any other party, if you've received emails, phone calls, you need to disclose that. So that's what we mean by ex parte disclosure. Do you have any more questions on ex parte? Because that might be new to you as well. Okay. All right.
So just to kind of follow up on that, usually Design Review Board, we do this with everything. So the petitioner will come and present to us, and we'll allow the petitioner, please don't interrupt the petitioner, let them present everything that they're going to present to us. And then we'll call on staff, who's Leslie this morning, for her report to us, and then we'll have a discussion. So we'll each have our comments to that for the petitioner. You can ask him questions at that time. And then once we have those discussions, then we'll have a motion or we won't. So, thank you.
So the first thing that we'll do now, if you have no other questions, we'll swear in our witnesses, and Ally does that for us.
Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
And now is the time, Mr. Chair, that you would ask for ex parte disclosures.
So disclosures, so I'll, go ahead, Julia. Yeah, we'll just go down
You
the
looked
line.
at me, so I was going to go first. I've had no contact with the petitioner, although I do live around the corner, so I pass the site all the time.
I have not had any disclosures with the petitioner or have had a site visit.
I am familiar with the site and have reviewed the petitioner's application. I believe Mr. Shukart and myself have had a few phone calls on other projects, not this one, and a brief conversation on this one about a month ago. Just him letting us know that he's probably going to need to bring this before CRAB.
I visited the site and reviewed the application package.
I reviewed the application package. I know Mr. Shukart. I've walked around the property there. I think he and I met there once, but it had nothing to do with this particular application. And as far as Mr. Pasadomo goes, I've had no contact with him on this matter, but anytime he talks, I like to listen. So.
So with that, I'll ask Leslie to introduce the petition to you, and then the petitioner will provide their presentation.
I don't have much of an introduction. Anita already mentioned it. I'll state Leslie Dolmer with the City of Naples Planning Department. My resume and qualifications are on file with this petition, and I've been certified as an expert in planning and zoning matters before the Design Review Board, the Planning Advisory Board, and City Council. I'm not sure, Nancy, if it's necessary for them to accept me as an expert in this matter or not.
It would be preferable, just so we have it on record. Again, I don't know that you've appeared before them in your role as an expert.
It's been quite some time. And
Okay, so if you all are convinced that she is qualified to provide testimony to you today regarding these matters concerning her expertise of the City of Naples Code of Ordinances related to land use matters, as well as Florida statutes, and her planning background and experience, then a motion would be appropriate to accept her as a witness, as an expert witness.
I can also provide a little brief background if that would be acceptable to this board, since you're not familiar with my background, before you make that motion. I have an undergraduate degree in urban planning and development and a master's degree in landscape architecture. I have worked in the state of Florida since 2008, I believe, 2009, around that time. The early part of my career was working in the private sector for multidisciplinary design firms, and then I moved on to my public sector career with the town of Fort Myers Beach for a period of 5 years, and I've been with the city since 2014. Started as a planner too, and then senior planner, and now I'm the deputy director. So a little bit of my background.
Motion to accept Leslie as a expert witness?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Passes.
All right. I think at this point, it would be acceptable to allow the petitioner to present their item, and then following that, I will provide a brief summary of my staff report.
Sounds good.
Morning. Morning, Mr. Chairman, members.
Morning.
My name is John Pasademo. My address is 821 Fifth Avenue South in the city of Naples. Our firm represents Victoria Square Properties LLC as landlord and TNB Florida LLC as tenant in an outdoor dining application for a new restaurant to be located at the northwest corner of Victoria Square Shopping Center on Central Avenue and 12th Street in the Naples downtown zoning district. The 3,556 square foot restaurant addition triggers the need to provide a total of 77 parking spaces in the shopping center. 74 will be provided on site. Victoria Square Properties constructed 7 on-street parking spaces adjacent to the property, highlighted here in blue, under a city right-of-way permit upon its redevelopment of the shopping center in 2016. It did not then seek, it did not receive, and it does not now request credit for such spaces against its on-site parking requirement. Alternatively, our application requests an allocation of 3 on-street parking spaces to the property. Section 58-916 of the Naples Code provides that in the downtown district, and only in the downtown district, on-street parking may be allocated to meet the parking requirement for property that is 100,000 square feet or smaller in size if the property is located in the same geographic district as the allocation. The proposed on-street parking is indeed located in the same geographic district as the property. The staff report indicates that 120 on-street parking spaces are available for allocation from the parking pool. The shopping center comprises approximately 66,000 square feet in area, and the code allows for an allocation of 15% of the required parking for properties which are 60,000 to 100,000 square feet in size. The subject property therefore qualifies for an allocation of 12 parking spaces. The code prescribes a fee of $7,550 per allocated parking space, and the standards for allocation of on-street parking have accordingly been met. Section 2-573 of the code assigns a Community Redevelopment Agency Advisory Board the responsibility for making recommendations for the sale of on-street parking to City Council, and we respectfully request your recommendation of approval. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Staff report?
Well, Once again, Leslie Dolmer for the record. Petitioner did a pretty good job of just laying out the facts. This particular request is pretty straightforward. The petitioner is requesting to redevelop the subject property with a restaurant and a cocktail lounge. The majority of the outdoor seating for that would be, or majority of the seating for that would be outdoors. And so that outdoor seating is an addition to the existing developed square footage on the property, and that requires parking. Parking is calculated at 3 spaces per 1,000 square feet, which results in the addition of 3 required spaces that the property is not able to accommodate on site. And then, so pursuant to 58.916 of the Land Development Code, on-street parking can be allocated to meet the parking requirement on properties that are less than 100,000 square feet. This property is less than 100,000 square feet. And provided there is parking available in the pool. So that there's an on-street parking pool in the D downtown, and for on-street spaces that are located in 2 geographic areas. That's north of Central and south of Central. And I included in your background that chart where we monitor the available parking spaces and who has allocated from those pools and the remaining spaces. The subject property is south of Central. There are 120 spaces available. They are requesting 3, so there's certainly enough spaces to accommodate that particular request. And then the final criteria is that for properties 60,000 square feet to 100,000 square feet, the maximum allocation for development of that property is 15%. The 3 spaces that they're requesting reflects 4%, so they're certainly underneath that requirement as well. Overall, this redevelopment and the design of this particular property was presented to the Planning Advisory Board, or not the Planning Advisory, the Design Review Board, back in March of 2021 with a slightly different concept. The project has evolved in that time, as one would expect, considering from 2021 to now. And this latest iteration, we think, is probably the best that we have, the best project we've seen from this developer for the use of this particular space. They will also need to take a outdoor dining petition to City Council for approval, and then come back to Design Review Board for the final consideration of any of the built structures that are included in this particular proposal. Staff also notified surrounding property owners within 1,000 feet of the subject property, notifying them of this particular request. We will also notify for both the City Council hearing and the final design review hearing. So anybody that's interested will have 2 additional opportunities to consider the application, the overall application, and provide any sort of public comment should they wish to do so. With that, staff's available for any questions.
Thank you.
Sure.
So we'll start with Julie if you have any questions for the petitioner or comments.
I do. Mr. Pasadoma, the site plan, that entire area is Victoria Square property?
It is.
Okay, and that's Ferguson's and all, that's where that is.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the bowl, are you taking over the bowl, or is the bowl going to be, it was confusing. I couldn't tell if the bowl was going to stay or where your restaurant was going to be.
The bowl will stay.
Okay.
What you see here highlighted in yellow is where the restaurant will be located.
Okay.
The kitchen facilities are within the existing structure.
So where this sign, where it says signage here, that's probably where your kitchen's going to be, that little square in the back?
You know, I can't see that as well.
Well,
If
on
you
your,
look on your screen right here,
yeah, on the
Highlighted
screen.
here
Yeah, okay.
is, the
Okay.
kitchen's in the
Great.
northwest corner of the building, and the outdoor dining is between the bowl and the kitchen.
Okay,
here's the kitchen, this is the outdoor dining area.
okay. And this is a comment, I think you've done a great job. This is a comment that at some point, the sound aspects of the outdoor dining can expect to be considered.
Yes, ma'am.
I didn't want to let that meeting go without that. I had some,
That's part of the criteria considered for outdoor dining. With that outdoor dining application, there is an element of that.
okay,
I've had the benefit of seeing some of the plans for this particular project, and there are some buffering elements that are being proposed in the outdoor dining area, but that's definitely something that will be considered by City Council with their outdoor dining approval.
because of the proximity to residential units that will likely be your customers, so,
ma'am.
okay. I had some questions for staff
Yes, ma'am.
about this chart that's in here. This is the allocation chart. And it's because I've not had experience before. It is accurate then that nothing has been approved for allocation on the street since 2018? Is that correct?
I believe there was an allocation in 2019.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that particular project, I believe that was related to neighborhood health center. The fee and the actual transfer of allocation happens at the time the building permit is issued. And so if this particular request, say this particular request is successful and city council approves the allocation, then that fee happens when they come in for building permit. So if they go through the whole process and then something changes and they never decide to build this restaurant, they don't pay the fee, those spaces are not allocated until,
Okay.
so until that fee is paid, the spaces aren't allocated, we don't update our chart.
Okay, so since in the last 3 or 4 years, no fee has been paid and no allocation has been made, and so that's why these numbers are still good.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the second question I had, and yes or no is fine. I don't require a long answer. One of them is all the way back to 2004. Is there any kind of regular review of what's happening to these parking lots? Like if these parking spaces, if a building is sold, did they go with the building? Is there, I think, my recollection is this paying for parking just started to happen in the last 4 or 5 years, or how is that dealt with the really old ones?
Well, that's not really a yes or no answer, so I'll have to give you a little bit more.
Well, I was trying to.
I would love to just be like, yes, and be done with it, but I feel like
I don't want to
needs a
take
little
up
more.
the whole hearing on that, but I am curious about what happens to the 2005
So
allocations.
if the building's sold but the use remains, and the use that requires the parking remains, then that is continued. If it's a redevelopment situation, then it's handled through the review of redevelopment. It's, we're seeing a lot more redevelopment in this particular area, so it's, we would just have to review those as those redevelopment projects come in. But one thing I want to make clear is that it's an allocation of spaces, but it's not an assignment of spaces. So it's not like we're going to go out and sign these 3 spaces
Got it.
for, XYZ restaurant here. They're allocated from an overall pool, but they're not assigned.
Okay.
And so that I want to make sure that that's clear. If it wasn't in my memo, my apologies for that.
Okay. That's it for me.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Go to John.
Now, I feel that it's a very low impact on the number of spots that we have available or that are available, and seems like a good opportunity for a new business to start. So I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Generally, I'm in favor of the proposal. I did have one question for you, Leslie. We did have a parking allocation proposal come before this board, probably in 2020. It was Fifth Avenue for the new restaurant where the old Irish pub used to be. So the question comes, if I recall correctly, the spaces were valued at roughly $30,000 a pop, versus in this case, Mr. Pesodomo quoted $7,550. So the question is, how are these valuations
Sure.
determined?
Yeah, that was an allocation out of the parking garage.
Correct.
And this is on street in the D downtown zoning district. So 2 different districts, both in the CRA,
Yeah.
2 different districts.
So the CRA is now spending $9 million plus to build a parking garage within a stone's throw of this particular property. So the investment is still going to occur in D downtown as well. So again, just the question of, we're having to spend money to provide parking, and I appreciate the fact that you provided 7 in the initial build. But again, it's just a question of valuation of parking spaces.
Yeah, I would have to get back with you on how the city conducted the valuation of the on-street spaces. The valuation of the parking garage spaces, I believe, was related to the cost to construct the garages, and then was tied to a CPI increase index. And then petitioners have the opportunity, when they're going for spaces out of the garage, to request a reduction of that overall cost. And I know that has happened on a number of occasions. I believe I took a petition many years ago that requested a reduction in that cost. But I'm more confident in the valuation of the garage. I'd have to get back with you as how we came up with the valuation for the on-street spaces.
And has there been a CPI associated with the 7550, or is that
I don't
static
believe so.
number?
It's a static number actually in our Appendix A, which is where our fees are located. So that's probably something worth discussing.
Yeah, how, I mean, at this point in time, whose purview is the cost of the spaces within?
I think it's probably a joint discussion. I mean, the planning department would be involved. Anita, as CRA manager, would be involved. It would probably be a discussion, definitely with city council members, planning advisory board, you folks. It would be quite a few people, I think, would weigh in on how and how best to.
The only comment
Change
is
or
really
amend
is
that.
this, you know, we are already we'll be voting later today, in fact, on the garage again in terms of confirming its inclusion in the CRA. So just a comment in that regard.
Thank you. George?
To follow up a little bit on what Craig just asked, Leslie, isn't the city council sitting as council or as a CRA, aren't they now in discussions about what they want to do with those kind of fees?
There have been a number of workshops over the last year related to parking and to fees. I'm not entirely sure where those are in the process, but I think it's probably, if this part has not been included, it's probably worth adding to the discussion.
Okay.
I apologize, I haven't been
No, it's
involved
okay.
entirely with those. I just kind of know on the periphery that there have been those discussions.
All right. I guess my only last question is, in this case, it's $75.50 a spot, so we're looking at, I think they were going to pay for 3 spots, so $21,000. Where does that money go? What fund does that end up in? Or do I need to ask Mr. Young?
There is, it's the, I'm gonna have to get back with you. There's an on-street parking fund, but I'm not sure that that's a satisfactory answer. So let me do a little bit more research, and I can certainly email the board with what I find out.
Okay, thank you.
Comes to me. So, now, great presentation. I appreciate it. It's the history of this developer. He always does go above and beyond what the city asks, and it's very appreciated. And it's proof in other properties he's done. I know a little more than a lot of the board because I'm on the design review board, so I have seen the presentations, which will shift a bit. It's an exciting project, and it's good to see kind of a unique outdoor dining experience. And it's just encouraging to see these types of projects coming into the design district. That's kind of what we all want to see, and we want to see, you know, foot traffic and people enjoying themselves out there. So, as related to parking, I mean, you're well within your requirement and the limits, and I don't see an issue with that. So, if nobody else has any further discussion, I can entertain a motion or.
Is there any public comment
Oh,
generally?
I apologize. Yes. Is there any public comment on this item? I don't see any.
Mr. Chair, if you could
Yes.
close the public hearing. If there's no further comment, then close the public hearing before you take the motion.
Just officially close it? Okay. So public hearings are closed. And I'll entertain a motion.
I guess, Mr. Pestano, you didn't have any closing comments or?
I don't. I want, thank you, Mr. Sturbridge. Mr. Chairman, it may be informative for the board to appreciate. Frankly, I don't know the derivation of the price, but I do know a little bit of the history of why the process was initiated. And it's important to recognize in the D downtown district, which is really a redevelopment district comprised of 118 acres, the intention was to allow cross-parking privileges. So this shopping center cannot deny parking to any other development in the area. And that concept of common parking privileges really extended to the public parking capacity that was available as well. And the allocation was intended to encourage redevelopment, to allow especially smaller properties to participate in the process so that they could defray some of their parking requirements. So this is just a continuation. It has been in place. We've employed it most recently for the Naples, the Neighborhood Health Clinic, but we've employed it many of the times that you see on the chart, always intended to encourage redevelopment and to support smaller properties to be able to compete in the marketplace. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to make the presentation and to respond to any questions that you may have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are you looking for a motion?
If anyone wants to give
Well,
one, yes.
because I think I should read whatever is in here, this paragraph where we talk about the CRAB following the hearing, consider the input and the recommendations of the staff, and by a vote of such and such, I make a motion that the parking application request included as part of petition 22 PDWN1 be approved, finding that the criteria have been met.
I second that motion.
So we'll do a roll call, please.
Member Ascar, absent. Member Dominic.
Aye.
Vice Chair Donaville.
Aye.
Member Fruchon, absent. Member Levy.
Aye.
Member Palmer.
Aye.
Chair Frederickson.
Approve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, so we'll move on to item 6A.
Can I make one comment?
Absolutely.
So Anita, if you would, given that, we've approved this, I would request that we at least explore the valuation of these spaces going forward.
The planning director just informed me that there is an amendment that's to the fees in Appendix A that is going, related to parking going to city council in August.
Okay.
We're gonna get back to the office and get a little bit more background information. I'd be happy to email that to the board, probably even while you're still in session. I just need to get in front of my computer and find all that detail, and I'll be happy
Yeah,
to
so,
provide that.
I mean, it would seem that to a reasonable standard that if we've got two parking garages currently in the Fifth Avenue district, let's call it, this is all part of the CRA, so these were built with CRA dollars to begin with, that there should be at least some level of uniformity across, because we're going to see more and more of these type of requests as this master plan starts to be implemented. And
Certainly like.
and if we're spending $9 million to build parking spaces now, at some point, they're going to be considered as well, just as the ones in the Fifth Avenue district. So,
I'll be happy, like I said, to
Okay,
get you some more
thank you so much.
background info.
Mr. Chairman?
I do recall some time ago, we did have a discussion prior to this board being here on where the allocation does go. And it was answered to us, but it would be helpful to have that reiterated. And I know it's a proper way and done well, but it'd be nice to have that detail for the board.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It's looking at a different part of the elephant. I'm still stuck on the ones that were approved in 2005. And if there's just a one-time contribution, in 2005, there probably wasn't any, I would think. I think the whole idea of paying for spaces is relatively new in the city. I don't know that, but I think 5 or 6 years. I don't know if they were in effect in 2005.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much we have on some of those early allocations, but I can look and see what I can
Okay.
find.
Well, it just seems like they're either grandfathered but they're a lot of spaces, I mean, they're not, it's probably half of the spaces that occur before 2009. I sort of did the numbers on it, and there looks like most of them, half are before 2009. And so I don't know if some of the part of this is contributing to the city, you know, which is why we charge the money. And I wonder if there's a group that are not. And I'm not saying they should or shouldn't be, I just would like to know what
And
their
there's certainly
situation is.
opportunities as we redevelop some of our streetscapes to add more on-street parking spaces into the pool. I know that was a discussion as part of this master plan, is what kind of on-street spaces do we want to add? Do we want them to be parallel? Do we want them to be at angle? What's the value to the community and to businesses in that respect? So I think one thing to keep in mind is that the on-street pool is not static.
No,
We can add to it.
Right.
And in fact, I believe this master plan contemplates actually reducing the on-street parking, but incorporating some off-street parking that would be city-owned as well, so.
There's a lot of ways to.
Right now, we're at 120 excess, and that's sort of borne out by the parking study that was performed, what, a year and a half ago or something like that, so, but, you know, you figure 120 spaces at $7,000, it pales in comparison to what we're getting ready to spend to create, what is it, 300?
But
I think-
surprisingly, we have quite a few still in our pool.
Yeah,
Even
no,
at
which is
that-
great.
Even at that bargain price. So-
Which is great, yeah.
Yeah.
Which probably speaks to the fact that some of the development hasn't occurred, that redevelopment hasn't occurred, that will occur.
And it's meant to be an incentive.
Mhm, no,
you know?
understood.
It's not meant to be an impediment as much as an incentive. Now, if we want to change what the goal of the parking is, then, you know, well, that's a
Well,
discussion to
I
have.
think the thing is that we are, you know, when we looked at our capital improvement plan, we're going to be spending the money to create these spaces to go into that pool as well, so the pool will actually have more than what it currently has upon completion of that. And so, again, I think the 7,000 is probably way too low, given the investment we're preparing to make to create additional parking.
Thank you for your
Alright.
comments.
I'll get back with you.
And
Thanks, Leslie.
I'll just add to that discussion is that as we begin implementing the Naples Design District Master Plan, that's, you have the copies before you now, but when we implement that, part of that implementation plan is going to be looking at the zoning district, downtown, potentially an overlay. And when we come back to you with any of those amendments, all of those considerations will be in front of you. So how we're dealing with parking and noise and light and every other regulatory factor that will be involved in the Naples Design District will be open for consideration in downtown and an overlay. So you'll be seeing this at a broader scope. But it's good to think about this process and is this process need tweaked or not? So you can think about that as we go forward with the zoning amendments and bring those back before you and the CRA. So with that, we'll move on to the next item on your agenda, which is a draft capital improvement. And this item is continued from your May meeting. And so from the May meeting, it did go ahead and go forward to the CRA at their June meeting this month. So I'll give you some of the benefit of that discussion as we go through that as well. I might have to grab that.
Excuse me, but David, my laptop isn't working. It's loading and reloading and reloading.
Just grab the one next to you. You.
So to begin the discussion of this draft capital improvement plan, basically we do a capital improvement plan for any improvements over $10,000. And this is presented to you annually to CRAB. So when we go through this, you will hear this about this time each year as we plan for capital improvement. So as you see a 5-year plan, just note that we go through this annually, so it is subject to change. The capital improvement plan that the CRAB entertains is based on the redevelopment plan. So our redevelopment plan for the city of Naples has specific goals and objectives and projects to focus on. So any of the capital improvements that we bring forward as a recommendation must be consistent with the redevelopment plan that we have. It also has to be, the capital improvements have to be in the CRA boundary. So while the city council can help support funding to the CRA, when the CRA spends funds out of the CRA budget, it has to be within the boundaries of the CRA, and we're approximately 508 acres of CRA area. So this is the anticipated funds, and it is updated now. And so basically what we have learned is that it increased annually this year about 19%. So we have just over $700,000 additionally this year due to the property values increasing. So remember, we are financed through TIF, or tax increment financing. So every increment that the value increases, that goes back into the CRA. So with the property values increasing this year, it resulted in over $700,000 additional dollars to the CRA to go into capital improvements and planning programs. So this is the overall capital improvement program, the draft for discussion, and it has some items in there that are placeholders. So we're going to go through each one of those and discuss those just a little bit further. But the first one is, of course, the parking garage. And yes, great.
Can we back up
Sure.
2 slides, I guess?
Yep.
So we're projecting in 24-25 and 25-26 deficit for a balance, if you look at the fund balance numbers. And how would that fiscally actually work?
Yeah, and this one, I believe this one has been updated since that time. But that is also going to be going to the debt payment as well. And so as this comes back to you, the budget that comes back, Gary will be here with us and be able to explain how that's going to work out over those years.
Presumably, we cannot spend in deficit. We would have to then go to the market and raise additional funds to cover the 2.3 million, 2.6 million.
Microphone, please.
Pardon me?
Yeah.
To cover the deficit that's
Yes.
projected in those 2 periods.
Right, and part of the consideration, if you've had an opportunity to listen to Gary's presentation to the CRA on this draft CIP, there is an opportunity to think about how much that we are going to borrow, because we are going to be borrowing for the garage. So if there's a decision to go forward with some other large capital improvements, say that we want to go ahead and rebuild 10th Street, we want to rebuild First Avenue South, then there may be, for the economies of scale, a reason to go ahead and fund those through that borrowing as well. So those are things that will be taken into consideration by you and your recommendations to the board going forward.
And we expect that to be presented to us in October, I guess?
Yeah, the final CIP will be presented to you actually at your meeting in September.
September, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So again, you'll notice from last year, the CIP is increased for the garage. Initially, it was earmarked for about $9 million in a cost, and it has been increased to about $13 million now. And Gary has indexed that about 3 different ways to determine what that number is more likely to be. The $9 million right now, we're estimating $13 million. So that's in the budget for this coming fiscal year. The design of that project is also, we have the design company under contract, and we're going to be start seeing design concepts for that garage coming before you very soon as we get to 30 and 60 and 90% design. So we anticipate the design of the garage will be done by December, and then we can go into construction next year, calendar year. So the next item for your consideration in the budget is affordable housing. And you have went through an affordable housing study, the 4110 master plan, now the Naples Design District master plan. And both of those have recommendations for housing that is affordable and strategies to do that. So what staff has done is we've earmarked some funds to go into the CIP for affordable housing projects. What you may consider is giving a little bit more definition to what that looks like to the CRA. So I had attached to your agenda a list of projects and some tracking, a draft document that I've been working with to try to understand the past plans that the CRA have accepted, the Fifth Avenue study, the neighborhood studies, and try to find where the recommendations are, what the commonalities of each one of those plans are. So on affordable housing, you've had recommendations for housing improvements, so maintenance of the single-family homes that we currently have in the CRA. You've had recommendations for changing our codes to allow different housing types, whether it's liner buildings, smaller units, guest houses. You've had all kinds of recommendations for different housing types. There's also recommendations for a land trust. So those are the types of projects for affordable housing that the master plans and the studies have brought forward to you. So what you can consider now is, out of this 13 million, are there specific strategies that you would recommend to the CRA to go forward with in a housing trust fund, in improvements, in zoning codes? Now, if you think one of the strategies to look at the different housing types to make sure that we have the right housing types available, that's a zoning project, a code amendment. So that would come into our budget for amendments to our codes, but it's not necessarily a capital project. So not necessarily in your capital improvements. In your capital improvements, you need to be looking at land costs, acquisitions, and any maintenance or improvements to housing. For instance, you had the forecourts and the side courts in the 4110 master plan. In the affordable housing, you had more improvements to housing in River Park East. So there's a wide range of recommendations that you have. So on this item in particular, you can have considerations of, would you like to have more detail of how that $3 million should be spent? And that would be a recommendation to the CRA for their consideration. So if you all would like to pause on any one of these to give those consideration, or if you want me to go through this and then come back to these items, we can do that.
Yeah, I think if the board would like, once you do each one, we may
Okay.
want to discuss each one. That way we don't forget about comments we want to make on each one.
Okay. So the first item, again, was the garage. We know that one's going forward. We're going to be funding that for about $13 million. The second one is on our list for our draft is the affordable housing. So if you have any discussion on that, I'll just pause for you.
So the increase from 9 to 13 is just economic?
It is.
So during the design consideration for the parking garage initially, when we were arriving at the 9 million, there was a discussion of a three-level or four-level parking garage.
That's
Is there
correct.
any consideration of going back to the three-level to then, and that may be,
So
penny wise, pound foolish.
Yeah, the design considerations that we have for the architect to design to is 360 spaces. So if they can fit that in 3 levels, great. But it's more of the parking spaces consideration, and then also meeting the code. The garage is in the Naples Square PD, so they do have to follow the code as required by the Naples PD. And the height limitation in that code is a maximum of 50 feet for that garage. But it's really the number of spaces that we're looking to achieve on that entire area, both in the garage and on the parcel as well. So if we can get some surface parking on that parcel in addition to the garage, then we want to make that the most efficient that we can.
So that property is part of the Naples Square PD?
Yes, it is.
I was unaware of that, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So that's your regulating
So by
zoning.
so by virtue of that, because the earlier considerations were trying to fit within the max height allowed by the city, and you're saying we have an additional 8 feet or so to,
Right. I think, of course, that would be, the greatest achievement would be to get those 360 spaces in 42 feet. But the code does allow them to consider 50 feet if that's what's needed. And I believe it's really the elevator shafts that push it up a little bit. It's that kind of detail that increase the height of these parking structures.
I think it's important to point out that land was donated. Is that correct?
Yes, the city is not acquiring the land, but the land is provided in helping to achieve the parking requirements for the Gulf Shore Playhouse and the surrounding area.
Thank you.
I may have misspoke. Anita undoubtedly knows, but I don't know about that yet, whether, because, wind had something to do with that, and I'm not sure the wind was in the Naples Square PD. So I think I misspoke.
frankly, I would be surprised if that property was part of the PD, but, again, I haven't done the research to,
Gulf Shore is, Gulf Shore Playhouse is. I just didn't know that.
okay,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, it's, if you all would like the reference to it, it's the Naples Plan Development. It's the public services designation of that area, which includes the Gulf Shore Playhouse and the parking garage itself.
And I just wanted to follow up with Luke's question. As far as a donation, there is an executed agreement where there was an exchange of allocation of parking spaces for the land. So it was not just a complete donation. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. There's other terms and conditions in that agreement as well.
160 or 180 of the 360 spaces, I believe, was going to the Gulf Shore Playhouse.
Thank you.
So we're spending 13 million for, 180 spaces. So do the math. It's needed, but it's not necessarily a great deal for the city.
So if there's no more discussion on the parking garage, any discussion on affordable housing, any detail that you would like to go forward with recommendations to the CRA of our strategy of filling out the $3 million that would be allocated to this affordable housing?
I'd like some clarification if I could. If I understood correctly, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, and please do. You talked as if the money could be, let's use Washington Carver, and then we'll move to Jasmine K as well. Those are the two that I'm looking at where the master plan, the DPZ plan, talked about what I'll term a gussying up of those two developments. Mm-hmm. Is that the money that this is looking at, rather than to totally redevelop, let's say, George Washington Carver?
Correct. The strategy for affordable housing will take into consideration the future redevelopment of George Washington Carver, but not this year. So that is going to be a discussion with the management of George Washington Carver and understanding the lifespan of those buildings and also the tenants in those buildings. So we may come up with a strategy of understanding that lifespan, and then as new tenants come in, we might want to keep one building vacant and make sure that we're managing the tenants in those buildings, so you can have an opportunity to start finding buildings that can be redeveloped and working towards that plan. But that is not something that is a short-term priority, but I believe in the master plan it was a long-term priority for that property to be redeveloped and provide additional housing on that property.
So that the numbers that are reflected in this CIP budget here under 23C16 affordable housing projects, that's the gussying up then?
Yes, it
little
could be.
back
Yeah, it could
porches
be. That was a short-term project for the recommendation out of the
Okay,
Naples Design District.
that clears that up. Thank you.
I guess what occurs to me is that we keep hearing through this, the DPZ design, that we're looking for low-hanging fruit. That's something that can be accomplished sooner rather than later, so that we can demonstrate that the city is moving forward with identified needs. And I wondered if we should talk about what we think that is as a consensus to the CRA, what they should do first in this area, if anything.
Well, I think as part of the master plan, because that was just approved very recently by the CRA. Now we have a kind of a clearer path of what in the last year and a half, we were giving advice on the low hanging fruit, the light poles and lighting and where can we clean things up. I think with this, and I could be mistaken, but I believe now that we have the master plan approved, we can start implementing those things that we actually see that have been approved now.
So the gusseting up is part of that.
I believe, yeah, as part of the
I think so
plans.
too. I'm just trying to decide if there's
Yeah.
consensus on that or what, yeah.
Yeah, that was a short-term recommendation for the forecourts and side courts. However, full disclosure, we need to still have the discussion with the management team to understand any considerations of those types of projects. But that was one of the recommendations.
All right. Continue, please. Thank you.
Okay. No further discussion on affordable housing? The Naples Design District improvements. The following, last fiscal year, we had budgeted $500,000 for improvements for capital improvements, and the idea was that there was stormwater concerns, and we could quickly identify a stormwater project, and that $500,000 would be there to make that improvement. That money has not went to a project yet, so we're carrying it forward. So we have also added another $1 million to that implementation schedule for the Naples Design District. Now, and I'll talk about this in the administrator's report, but we did, with the CRA did accept the final master plan, and that master plan is complete. And during that discussion, they also asked staff to bring back to the CRA a 3 to 5 year implementation strategy. So that will be coming before you in August. So before it gets to the CRA, we're going to have both affordable housing strategy for you and also the 4110 implementation strategy as drafts for your consideration and recommendation to the CRA. So that will be coming back. But during the CIP discussion is a good time to begin that discussion of your priorities of both the Naples Design District and all of the CRA in the projects that we have for affordable housing and the Naples Design District. The CRA did have consensus at their discussion of the Naples Design District that 10th Street is a priority for them. So that we do have that as consensus. So we could assume that this 1.5 would be going to improvements for 10th Street. Now, during that discussion, the directors were also available, and what we learned is that we have a basin study, a stormwater basin study that's going to be coming before the City Council in the fall. That does include the Naples Design District area. That will be a lot of information and data and analysis that should be considered with any infrastructure project. We also have a utility study coming before City Council. So 2 studies that should be relied upon for these infrastructure projects in this area. So if it is going to be at 10th Street, First Avenue, then we would have some of the underlying data and analysis on stormwater and utilities so that we know that now that 10th Street, north of Central Ave, the recommendations from the master plan are really more aesthetic. So we need to deal with parking, we need to deal with the pedestrian and the bicycle, and we need better landscaping in that area. But we also understand that the stormwater, the basin study may say we need a bigger pipe, so we're going to have to dig the street up. So it's a matter of timing, how we schedule these projects. We also learned that First Street First Avenue South needs more utility work. So it needs more stormwater, more utility pipes under the ground. So that is a project that's going to be moving forward with utilities as well. So when we have utilities and stormwater projects, those are also two funds that can join the CRA. The city council can also make the determination that this is to the greater benefit of the city. So they're going to fund it with city dollars. So they can move funds around into the CRA. We just can't move funds outside of the boundary of the CRA. So so those are some considerations for you as well, thinking about the 4110, what that funding is going to be used for in this coming fiscal year and how we apply it going forward. You have a lot of recommendations out of the master plan, but the CRA has determined by consensus that 10th Street would be their priority for this area.
And we have staff recommendations coming to us as well.
You will have, some, a strategy for implementation coming before you. And of course, we will take into consideration all of the direction that we have received from the CRA and your input as well. And that's gonna all kind of come back to the CIP and the budget. But this is kind of your first look at this and going forward. So we can continue to discuss this and refine this in your recommendations to the CRA. Their first meeting will be September 1st when they come back. So you're going to be meeting in August before their meeting. So the next item is First Avenue South improvements, and we just had, I just discussed that a little bit along with the 10th Street. First Avenue South improvements, as I understand, it's been in the CIP for a number of years. And it has, the funding has decreased, the project scope has decreased, but we continue to have it here as a placeholder for you. So we just moved that $400,000 from last year forward to this year. And that would be for consideration, is this a CRA joint project with the city, or is this a city project that would be funded solely by the city? But we have continued to move that funding forward as a placeholder and for discussion. It's still in the queue. And the last item that you have continuing in the CIP is the North Garage painting and sealing. And what has happened is these planter boxes are cracking. They need repair. They're leaking. So that's the sealing and repair that's needed. The discussion at the CRA for consideration is, should the CRA participate in maintenance? Or once the CRA builds these, this infrastructure and it's turned over to the city, should that be a city obligation to continue maintenance? And the CRA does projects and the maintenance is absorbed by the city fund. That was a discussion, no determination yet, but that is the discussion that's going to be, was happening at the CRA. So there's not a consensus on that, but it was an item of discussion that you can consider as well, should, in a bigger picture, right? So should maintenance continue to be funded by the CRA, or would you recommend that funding is a smaller portion of the CRA completely by the city, or it is something that the CR should continue to fund? So that would be your discussion point on that item. And that's the last items that we have for the CIP this year, but I'm just going to back up so you can have in front of you the spreadsheet and the funding and how that continues out. I will also add that we had direction from the CRA during their meeting to move out the Fifth Ave and Sugden Plaza out to the fifth year. So that change is reflected in this CIP as well. So with that, I will be happy to answer any more questions or follow your discussion, but if we can have some consensus on any of these items, you can discuss it, and if you have consensus, I'll be glad to carry that forward. Or if you have any motions that you would like to make, I'll carry that forward. But we would like to have some information to carry forward to the CRA in some level of detail for their consideration on your thoughts of how the CIP should be going forward in the following years.
Is that something you would want from this discussion, or would that be for the board to come back and at the next meeting
So if
with
you have,
recommendations, or?
yeah, I would say that if you can discuss each one now, just so we can start to see some consensus of how we're moving, we can adjust the CIP to that. And then it would give the CRA more discussion. It would give you more discussion when we come back with the implementation plan. It might also influence the implementation plan as we're carrying it forward, listening to your comments now.
Okay. Well, we can start with the parking garage. I'll open that to discussion and recommendation.
Since I'm so new on this board, I would really appreciate hearing what those of you with longer experience. so
Sure.
that if that's-
Let's start down here.
We gotta start at this end? Well, I'll just go down the list. I guess it's,
And
but I have a,
for your benefit, before you begin on the parking garage, we do, as Nancy mentioned, we do have a public parking garage agreement. So we do need to honor that, and we are going forward with the parking garage in agreement with that. So that is another piece of information that you need to consider. So we would not be moving this line item in concert with that agreement at this time. But one thing that you can consider is, as we're going out to seek funding for this, should we add more funding for 10th Street and First Ave so the CRA has more funding flexibility? Those are the things that would be considered. But the parking garage, we do have an agreement that we would need to honor.
oh, I was gonna say we should just cancel the whole thing.
Before you did, I just wanted to put that on the record short.
In seriousness, I turned to the last page of your improvement program, because I got this 3 pages.
Yes.
And at the top of that 3rd page, it says the neighborhood planning projects. So we didn't even talk about it, nor is it even shown on this. I don't know what happened to that.
So the neighborhood planning projects that came out of those funding sources are now being rolled up into other efforts.
Okay.
So the last one that we are still working on in the neighborhood is the landscape. So you have achieved many of the recommendations from that neighborhood plan. Having said that, if there are other items from that neighborhood plan, for instance, one that I can remember is landscaping the FPNL site. So that was from the neighborhood plan. If you all believe that project or any of the projects from the neighborhood plan should be in the CIP, then that should be brought forward for discussion. It's not limited to these items that you can discuss, but certainly the neighborhood plans as well. So anything from that matrix that you think should be brought into that CIP, we can consider that as well.
Okay, well, I'll stay with that for just a second then. So that wall that's there at the FP&L building that we're gonna put the parking face into, or however we're gonna put the parking and pick up the additional maybe 20 spaces, is there gonna be some kind of shielding of that big ugly wall?
So I haven't seen the design on that, but they have the survey. They're doing the design in-house.
Okay.
So they're just laying that out now. I haven't seen the design on that, but certainly if landscaping is part of that design and that's your recommendation, then that's what we'd want to look at.
Well, I think there should be some landscaping there. And then we'll go to the other portion of what I'll call the Lake Park neighborhood that is within the CRA and the design district. And that would have to do with 10th Street and making that easier to maneuver bicycles through that area north of 5th Avenue all the way up to 7th. which is within the CRA. So if that's going to be covered under improvements of, under the 4110 Master Plan Improvements, 10th Street area, then fine. I don't need to say any more than that. That I don't want to disclude that portion of 10th Street.
I think that's good additive, so we know the scope. So it's not from Fifth Avenue to Central, but it's from Central to 7th is your recommendation.
Correct.
Yep.
And then the way that they're all listed, I mean, parking garage, affordable housing projects, 4110 Master Plan, First Avenue South improvements, and then the sealing and fixing of the north garage. I mean, the order of them is fine by me. If we shift one or two because we have someone feeling a little stronger about one than the other, then that's fine. But that's my comments to get the ball rolling.
Microphone. Thank you. Really, I guess a couple things. Excuse me, the parking garage, I think we've covered thoughts on that. And understand that we have this is really not so much, do we build the parking garage, but then it's more a question of how do we allocate the spaces and what's their associated cost. Again, I feel like it's very needed within the district, so not questioning the project, but questioning perhaps some of the details. Affordable housing, I think it's going to be difficult to allocate $3 million, so my suspicion is that it will push into future years. Again, spending $5 million beyond that, so it's a total of $8 million over the next 4 years. I guess I would ask that it seems to me that baked into that number needs to be some level of land acquisition to do the work. And then also, I do think that a overview and revisions to zoning to allow for some of the building types that were contemplated in the master plan certainly would be a good first step to then allow developers to know what they can do with their potential piece of property. The 4110 master plan, I think, we'll look to staff to see what, because there's so many, what sounds like a good idea for an improvement to 10th Street may not be such a good idea if you're going to have to tear it up to then do the infrastructure. So it seems to me the infrastructure needs to be made right, and then we can start to layer all the pieces on top of it. First Avenue South, it will be interesting to see. That's always been a bit of a question because the number's been all over the map in terms of what's incorporated in there. And given the development that we now have on First Avenue South, I guess would withhold comment until we see what's being planned for the area. And do we have a sense of does this stretch to 8th Street, or does it only go to 41? What's the boundaries of that 41? I mean, that First Avenue South.
From what I have read, the boundary was from Goodlet Frank to 8th.
Oh, to 8th, okay. So similar to what happened on 3rd, okay.
Right.
The north, and then I guess the garage painting and sealing, the only question there, the question you raised of should it be a CRA expense or a city expense, I think some of that would be answered if we knew where the funding is going. I believe the funding goes back into the CRA, but I may be wrong in that recollection because
I believe it does. It carries over, doesn't it?
There is a specific parking fund, and we'll have Gary follow up with you and at your next meeting to discuss that parking fund and how you all can consider that in future projects.
If the money goes to the CRA, then certainly it would seem reasonable that CRA would bear some of the cost of maintenance versus throwing it all on the city itself. If seems to be a good use of CRA dollars. Beyond that, I think the rest of these, let's see, affordable housing we talked about. Yeah, the rest of this is, I think will take care of itself in due time, but those are the ones we're funding in the coming year.
Okay.
Yeah, I kind of agree with my first two colleagues here. Everything they said I'm in full agreement with. It's no secret my concern with 10th and the safety for bicyclists for sure. The couple of comments I had to add was just the parking garage partnership and maintenance versus CRA versus city. And we'd have to probably get more information from Gary on this, but just from experience, I would feel that if the city maintained that constantly, as far as little projects, okay, we're gonna take care of here and here and here, I think that would be much better use of funds, whether the CRA or the city. But that's preventative maintenance, in which you're not letting everything kind of get to a point where then you have to spend $250,000 to redo everything. So I think it'd be good to kind of look at, upkeep and preventative maintenance on these things, instead of just kind of you wait until it's time. And then I know with the beautiful parking garages that we have existing, they need maintenance and they have plantings, and and if that's kept up with, you don't turn it into a massive repair and expense. It's better to kind of take those bites off, whether it's from CRA funds and half from city or CRA. I think that's something we should look at, or maybe it is already being looked at.
Yeah, the CRA does pay for maintenance on that. For instance, we are power washing the garages now, so that's coming out of the CRA maintenance for those areas, and painting as well. So that is typical maintenance that the CRA is doing.
Now,
for
is
those
that city,
garages.
or is that subcontracted through other vendors?
That's subcontracted, yeah.
It is.
For power washing and
Okay,
things
so it's
like
not
that.
city employees, it's,
Right,
Okay.
city employees, project managers, yeah.
okay,
But they do contract the work.
okay. That's really all the comments I have. I agree, it's kind of in the right order, and I think it's nice to see, everybody's all over the map on affordable housing, but it's nice to see that we're taking that forward step and putting, the first step is getting money allocated and get it there, and then you can really be proactive in finding solutions, because the solutions are not easy. So it's good to see that. So I think the appropriation of funds, I agree with. So those are my comments.
As Julie commented earlier, new as well, so I'm still trying to get my arms around all this, but I'm going to heavily weigh on my seasoned members here to kind of guide us in the right direction, and taking lots of notes to be able to grow, more information about all these topics, and then I'll be able to weigh in a little bit more than I am now. Thank you.
I think my contribution to this meeting was to have the good judgment to listen to people who knew what they were talking about. So I appreciate those comments and agree with them. I waited to see if anybody mentioned land acquisition parking lot development. And maybe all of you know what that is, but I don't. But it has a big number. It's $2 million the next year. What is that?
So that is in there on the Naples Design District Master Plan. They have recommended two additional locations for parking, either surface parking, it could begin as surface parking and then a garage, but just recognizing that with the redevelopment of the area, there will be more need for parking. So that is a placeholder for that future endeavor.
So that was the one reference to something north, a garage north of.
Generally speaking, we need about an acre for a parking garage. So in an ideal world, a parcel would be found that meets those dimensions, and then a parking garage could, as Anita was saying, a parking garage could be some years off, but and be used as surface parking.
Great.
Such time.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. That's it.
That's all? All right.
Okay.
I think, do we need any more refining, or is that fairly clear for
Yes,
that?
yes.
Okay.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item here. 7A is continued to the last of the meeting, so we'll go to item 8A.
Yeah, so that is, item 8A is the CRA Administrator's Report. And we have covered many of the items through our discussion, but I'll just run through it. in case it reminds me. So the first item on the administrator's report is the Naples Design District Master Plan. I mentioned that the CRA did accept that plan. And we are in the process now of developing an implementation strategy for that, and we'll bring that back to you at your meeting in August. So we'll get into much more detail of that going forward. The housing affordability study was accepted, and that as well, we are now looking at those recommendations and developing a strategy to implement the affordable housing within the CRA. The next item is the Gulf Shore Playhouse Garage that we have been discussing, and we are kicking off the design of that. We have a very large design team. The consultant team and the City of Naples project team will be meeting this week to get that project going. And then following that, they do have a series of public workshops. So we will be reaching out to the stakeholders, to the public, to come together to provide comments on that design. So I think we've seen in redevelopment, it's always important to get the public input up front and to engage them throughout this process. So we'll be doing outreach, and then you will see the 30% design, 60% design, and all the way through the final going forward for recommendations to the CRA on that project. The
Anita,
next,
sorry to
Yes, go
interrupt
ahead.
you on that. It says BSSW Architects. I thought I read that was MHK. It is BSSW?
Yeah, so MHK did the conceptual design, the little photograph that you see here. So
Okay.
they did the conceptual to see if it would fit. So it was a lot fit conceptual design. And then when we put the project out to bid, we had a competitive bid process for
Okay.
that. And then it was awarded to BSSW.
All right. Sorry for the interruption. Thank you.
That's okay. It's good to get that clarification. Let's see, the next item is the Fifth Ave streetscape and Sugden Theater improvements. One thing on that, the hardscape and landscape improvements, the code change to Fifth Avenue did go to City Council through second reading. So that was adopted. So now for any redevelopment happening on Fifth Avenue within the overlay on Fifth Avenue South, they have a new landscape palette and hardscape palette that property owners will have to utilize during the redevelopment. So that change was from carried forward from this plan that went forward, and that's maintained. So the next implementation of that plan is the full streetscape redo, and the Sugden Plaza improvements, which you saw in the CIP, is out in the 5th year now. So those are in there. So unless we have some other direction to do anything else with that plan, that's kind of where we're at with that. It's in implementation.
Anita, could we, would it be possible for you to provide us with just a copy of what the approved palette was? Just, it might be good to know what's being done on Fifth as it relates to what we look at on 10th.
Yes, yeah, I will be happy. I will send the board the Fifth Ave overlay, the resolution. So it's just a list of the palette and the hardscape with some flexibility there and a map that shows you where that applies. So I'll send that to everyone so you have that resolution and you know that what the change was to the code. As far as the neighborhood plans, we had several projects that were being implemented through that. The landscape and irrigation improvements for 10th Street that you all heard again in May, we did have that discussion with the CRA. What the CRA recommended to us is take a break on removing trees, go forward with a bid for keeping the trees, doing ground cover, and replacing the irrigation. So staff is creating some alternatives in line with that consensus in that direction to do that. We are going to put this out to bid. When we get the bid back, then you're going to see it's going to come back to you again. And then we're going to break it out, and then you can say, go ahead and go forward with the avenues. But we know 10th Street's coming forward with some other improvements, and we can see that's a pretty high dollar value, so let's take a hold on that. But you're going to see alternatives. So we're developing alternatives through this bid process, and we're going to get back together with the stakeholders through that process as well, so they're aware of what the CRA's direction was, and that staff is responding to that direction to look at alternatives to bring back before you. So you'll see that again. The parking on 3rd Avenue North, that is under design right now, and that is, the design for that is just parking on the street. The design is being done in-house. We did have a surveyor do the survey for us, and then they're doing the design in streets and stormwater. So we will add to that to look at landscaping in addition to the parking spaces, and if that's possible. The streetlights for River Park East and West, that project is nearing implementation and full construction, so we hope to see those lights going in very soon, and that was funded through CDBG. We also, CRA is participating in some replacement lights, so we did buy a few extra lights, not using CDBG, but just so we'll have those lights in the event that anything happens and we need a replacement for those. So following that, I just had included some notes for you from the CRA meeting and their discussion. And that discussion was, again, understanding George Washington Carver and the management of that property and the operation of that property. So staff is in the process of learning more about that to take back to the CRA, and that could be part of our affordable housing discussion as well. They did have the discussion on CRA maintenance commitments, which you all have discussed today, and the funding sources as well. The other ask was for the CRAB chair to be in attendance at CRA meetings, and that is an agenda item that we're going to discuss at the conclusion of other items. There was also a request for us to effectively communicate the CRA's action on the Naples Design District Master Plan acceptance. So we have prepared a press release, and that will be going out no later than tomorrow for announcement that plan is complete and was accepted by the CRA. There was a discussion and a request to bring back more information to the CRA about the city's lighting policies, and it goes directly towards, I think, the noise and light. And I will remind you, if you haven't taken a look at the final master plan, the Naples Design District Master Plan, DPZ was very responsive to your comments, the PAB comments, CRA comments, and that they did add information after nearly every workshop, every advisory board. They were constantly refining that plan. So in response to the concerns and the questions about noise and lighting, particularly along the design walk, they did add some best practices for noise and light into that document. So that's something that you'll want to review, because as we go forward with amending any code, creating regulations for or any overlay on a design walk, those would be regulating factors for noise and light. They did put best practices in there, so that's the area that we're going to go to when we look at this code to say, is this the Naples standard, or do we need something different than that? So we will be having more discussion on that. There was also a request from the discussion, I believe, of the 10th Street and Avenues landscape. There was interest in looking at the policy of the city and the CRA in removing trees. So what is their policy, and is that something that they want to modify in any way? So that's a future discussion item that the city will, or the CRA will be considering. And then the last item was to bring back the neighborhood plans that were adopted in 2020 and to have a review and discussion about those again. There was no specific item of discussion for those, but I think it's something that as as you see, I've been trying to create this matrix. We need to understand where we're in line with all these master plans and if there's any conflicts. So if we've done a neighborhood plan, was that considered in the Naples Design District Master Plan? Those were considered, and you see a lot of commonality in those plans. So we were asked to bring the neighborhood plans back for a review and discussion. We might expand those. We might go back out. We don't know what the end result will be, but that will be an item that will be brought back. And then lastly, the CRA did set their fall meeting dates for September, October, and November. And at this time, we do not have a December date, and we'll make that determination at that time if we need a December date. And then I just added the reminder that these are just the notes from the administrator as I'm trying to facilitate and capture notes, but they are just my, summary of notes, but we should always go back to the clerk's minutes for a reflection of the CRA meeting and their action items. So with that, that's the end of my report, but I'll be happy to answer any questions or make any additions or changes to the report if needed.
Does anybody have any comments on Anita's report? All right, we can move on. Item 9, public comment. Do we have any public comment? I don't see any. So we'll move on to item 10A, which is correspondence. And I just wanted to just kind of preface, just in meeting with Councilman McCabe and last week.
Mr. Chair, before we go there, did you want to take Ms. Dominic's
I
correspondence
do.
first?
I'm just
Okay.
prefacing, I'm just making a comment on
Okay.
what she's
Very
doing.
good.
No, it's good. This is exactly what the CRA is asking for from all of the members up here. So do some homework and research, and anything that's on your plate, communicate it to Anita, because this is exactly what they want us to bring forward and have discussions on. So thank you for doing it, and we'll move into those comments.
Thank you, thank you. I had a couple of things that I wanted to bring up for consideration by members, and one of them is I'm still stuck, as I was on the first day, on an accurate CRA map. And at the outset, I wanted to say that this is no comment or reflection on staff. Anita and lots of city staff have been through 3 or 4 months, 5 months of enormous change and challenges. I mean, you came right in the middle of the DPZ, the 4110, lots of things were going on. So I say this in an effort to be helpful and to try and assemble some kind of consensus on the CRA board that what we need is some accuracy in the maps. And I also know that we're missing, what is it, a GIS, head of GIS in Naples, someone who puts together the map. So it's kind of hard to do that without a technology person. But I thought a discussion might be started to see what other members felt about what would be helpful on an interactive CRA map. And the first thing for me is that there be on the map what's there in the CRA now. And what caught my attention was initially, and that's why I thanked you for the front of the cover here, that both 1111 Central and Naples Square are actually depicted, because most maps you see of the CRA have just empty space. So that was important. In the last week or so, what has entered the chatter has been something about historical boundaries, and I have no interest in changing historical boundaries or anything like that. I just want what's in the historical boundaries to be accurate. So, I thought that, and I listed just some things that I thought were important, and not requesting any decision, but also want to see what else you all think might be important. And I don't think this project should turn into the only thing that staff is doing. So I'm not looking to create work. But I do think that as we make these decisions about the next year, the next 2 years, accuracy is important. So that was wanted to ask my colleagues on the committee about a map, anything else that might.
No, I think your comments are all really well taken, and you laid them out very nicely for the CRA and for us to discuss. I mean, I'm kind of in agreement with your comments. You know, if we're looking at maps, they should be accurate, or as accurate as they can. I understand that could become a full-time project for staff to try to keep up with everything, but, you know, to make sure they're as accurate as they can be. And I understand the sound and noise comment is really something to think about, and I think the master plan did a really good job at thinking about how to.
Yeah.
How to
See,
deal
I
with
didn't
that.
read it a second time. I had my marked up
Okay.
version, and I just thought that as, you know, I lived at Bayfront. So that was my first place I lived in Naples. And so my view is somewhat tainted isn't the right word, but is informed by what can happen. And I think that it's important that as we move forward in this area, that it not become another Bayfront where there's so much strife all the time. I mean, there's ways to play well together, and I think that people and I don't think that anyone who lives, as I do, in this area expects to sit on their balcony and hear crickets. You know, no one is thinking that. But, you know, to hear a Rod Stewart wannabe, and I love Rod Stewart, you know, from 6 blocks away, is probably not what it should be. And I still have on my phone decibel pictures of what Rocking on the Bay was. And it was 100 for 3 hours. That's a lot. It's in violation of everything, and so I think it's important to think about that ahead of time. There's technology for it to give whatever enforcement there is the resources they need, and to just sort of establish the tone that it's not the Wild West. That's what's important for me.
I think it's definitely a good comment to be mindful of. I know staff is really careful and permitting. I know they're very careful at what is allowed and what isn't. Not to say that after CO, things don't change. But I know the city's I know in my dealings with the staff and city, they work really hard to try to maintain that. And, but I think it's a great comment and something to
Thank
talk
you.
about for.
Thank you.
I was actually impressed thinking about that, looking through the approved master plan of how DPZ actually designed it, in which there are almost courtyards where the walls will kind of buffer that sound. And the
Great.
outside that faces the streets is actually more parking and back of house, if you will. It'll look like front of house, but the main activities are happening inside those corridors.
Great.
Which I think is a great thing for the
Yes.
neighboring communities as well.
Yeah.
So, does anybody else have any?
Yeah, if I could. Julie, the item 1, item 2, item 3, they're great. They're laid out. It took me a couple reads through to kind of get on the page where you were and to try to figure out, and I asked Anita for a little bit of help too. But yeah, those are all great requests, and kudos to you for sitting down and doing all that. Item 4, I guess we're going to talk about in a few minutes, but I have a curiosity from a vantage point that nobody else, I think, on the board has, as to what you wanted to ask you what you meant by number 5.
Actually, I wanted to take advantage of your vantage point. I did, purposely, and it was to just see if there was anything, you know.
I'm assuming, one, that you wrote this after the council had their last shot at the,
I did,
master
but I
plan.
knew
Okay.
not, I know nothing about what they did. I mean,
Oh,
it
okay.
just has not been,
well, what they
that's
did
fine.
is they approved the master plan.
That part I got.
But they
I-
left out the 2 roundabouts up in the northern part of the city, we'll call it, on Creighton Road. And then they, I think, if I understood it correctly, they delayed what we're calling the bicycle loop until a few things more get looked at, and that they hear a little bit more from the public. So,
So I put it on there because I wondered whether institutionally the CRAB, because of your particular interest in this, had any role to go back to CRA or council on
okay,
it.
well,
'Cause
CRA, within the CRA, there's only a small portion that's covered in this bicycle master plan. The bicycle loop would bisect on Central, going east and west through the district until it gets to 8th Street, and then it's outside the district. And I don't think anywhere else is it in the CRA. And that's already been completed. So, I mean, that's what we want the rest of this loop to kind of look like. Doesn't have to be exactly like that in all the rest of the places. But I was really curious that you
That's
put it on here.
Very
And
straightforward.
kudos to you, because obviously I'm
Wanted you to
deeply
tell us.
involved in all that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity.
Does anybody else have any comments on that? I had one more thing on, and they're good questions, the role of the crab as far as, and I think Anita is helping kind of define that for us as well. You had chair, vice chair attend crab meetings or CRA meetings? The A?
Actually, it was whether or not the chair of the CRA should come to our meetings from time to time. Maybe I see him back. I thought he was on vacation, but I guess he hasn't left yet.
Okay, so that's what that was.
So that was sort of one. And then I found it helpful to go through the previous, for new members, to go through the previous both crab meetings and CRA meetings. I mean, that was it's deadly. It's deadly. You just sit there and you have to just get a bottle of red wine and some cheese and crackers and just prepare yourself. But it's informative, it just really helps. It takes a long time to do. And then my thought about the relationship with the other volunteer boards is, I don't know if we have any relationships, but I think that the issues that come before us are, with respect to the crab, respect to the CRA district, at least as important. And I don't know whether we talk to them, because I'm not on that. Anyway, it was just for discussion. I
Sure.
didn't necessarily have a
Great.
view on it.
So I can help a little bit with the relationship to the other boards. This board is an advisory board to the Community Redevelopment Agency, which is the city council setting as the Community Redevelopment Agency. You have a very specific plan, you have a very specific boundary, and that's our sandbox, and we stay in that sandbox. The relationship to DRB and PAB, though, you can see a little bit of that today with your quasi-judicial items. Sometimes the code is going to say you need to go to this board rather than that board. So you can see that your relationship today is making a recommendation to City Council on parking allocation. Otherwise, the Planning Advisory Board is the land planning agency, which all zoning actions go through for recommendation to City Council, and the DRB for design of buildings as well. So the code dictates the process and which applications go to which boards. And those are always opportunities in those processes to look at and to see if it's most efficient or not. And so you can see today, for redevelopment and a parking allocation, you're making a recommendation rather than PAB to City Council. Is that the best process? Or is that a process that you would want to reconsider through reviewing the D downtown when we come back with the Naples master plan? So those are the relationships. Generally, the PAB and DRB are advisory boards to City Council. You are an advisory board to the CRA. But any items that you all would like to hear more information on, you're always welcome to call me as your staff member, and I can bring the right staff to you to hear more information about that. So it's not that you don't have input, but if you would like to have input on that, you could call me and request the item be brought forward to you all for informational items. But you would not take action on it in a quasi-judicial form like you do today. It's more for informational purposes.
I would like to just add the sandbox that Anita was referring to. It's actually in your Code of Ordinances, and it's 2-573. And there it sets forth what the duties and responsibilities are of this particular board. You might want to look at that if it hasn't been done recently, because just glancing over it, it looks like some items might be outdated a little, or perhaps require some revision. The other governing document that you have would be your bylaws. And I think some of the way you run your meetings and everything is in there. And I think that those have come up for a little bit of updating in the
Yes.
recent past.
Yes. That was, I think, the first order of business that when I came on is look at your bylaws, and you did make some changes to that.
Could you repeat the first portion again? Just,
It was
just the number.
It's just the citation to it. It is 2-573, and it's the Community Redevelopment Agency Advisory Board. And that is your sandbox.
Thank you.
I guess my thought about sandboxes is it feels protective, but my intent was that we know the most about what's going on in our sandbox, and that we become a source of information and expertise, and working cooperatively with the other boards that might ask us about what's going on. So.
Well, thank you. I think we'll move on to the last item. Is that okay with everyone? All right, so jumping back up to item 7A.
Mr. Chair, this is an item for your discussion and action upon this item. We have had a request from the CRA for the chair to attend the CRA meetings for reports and discussions on those items. So we would like you all to have a discussion on that. And then the chair can accept that duty, or you can take other action on that. If you have alternative solutions other than other chair, then alternative solutions would also be taken forward if that's your recommendation as well. But we do need some action on this item today, and the recommendation is for you to discuss this, and again, either the chair can accept this item. You could nominate a new chair if the chair does not want to discuss that, or if you all, through your discussions, feel there's an alternative solution to this, then discuss that as well.
So I'll just kind of preface, I just want to fill the board in with a few, it's all public record, but Anita and I exchanged a few emails, the CRA requesting me to come every month and give them a report of what we discuss. So my answer to that was, well, we're here and everything we do is recorded, and our sole purpose is to advise you. I would hope that CRA is watching these videos and taking Anita's detailed outline if they are too busy to watch those and do that. So in my opinion, that's a bit of a redundant exercise and not a good time of ours or the government's time, where I would then present a PDF or PowerPoint about exactly what we talked about and was on record already. So I respectfully declined that request. Anita, myself, Councilman McCabe, and the new city manager had a meeting last week. A great meeting. I told them I'm here to do what's needed, but again, respectfully decline that process because I don't think that's a good use of, I think that CRA should be watching what we're doing because we're advising them. And I don't think that I should come and represent or regurgitate that information that's already there. So I think a better process, in my opinion, would be like a workshop with all of us members once every few months or however that works out. However, the answer to me was, this is what CRA wants. So by them making this request, I think it's time for me to step aside, not only as chair of this board, but completely off of this board, because I don't believe my time is being spent well on this board by that request, knowing that it's not being listened to. So I'm going to step aside as chair and from this board, and I'll let you guys have discussion on a new chair and how you want to move forward on the CRA's request.
Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. Sorry, sorry to interrupt you.
It's okay.
Just for clarification, Anita, on the memorandum, it says the former CRAB chair provided a report on discussions and priorities regularly. I know that you and I's research on that found one in like 3 years.
At the regularly scheduled meeting, not regularly. I'm sorry if that was
Right,
awkward.
This is.
It wasn't a special
This has
meeting.
never been done, to be clear. This was not a common practice for for the chair of this board to do that. And the memorandum kind of made it look that way. So I just wanted to clarify that. This is a new request. This isn't something that's always gone on. And my schedule, and as I said, with all due respect, I feel that by this request being made of us, I feel that our meetings are falling on deaf ears a bit. So that's my opinion, and I'm going to step aside and gracefully let whoever wants to take over do that.
So I wonder, Councilman McCabe, would you care to provide some color as to the request and the rationale behind? Or Chair McCabe, I guess, in this particular case?
Good morning, Chair Mike McCabe. And yes, we've had conversations as the CRA board, and the conversations were that it was very useful and really enhanced the conversations and the deliberations of the CRA when that took place. And so it was a request that we continue that and move forward with it because of what it added. That's pretty simple. And then we had the conversations, Luke and myself and the city manager, and looked at it and said that moving forward, the ask might be more than what is wanted as far as time, because Luke is serving on 2 different boards, and the conversation was understanding he has a business and he has time, and if that is to the point where can't perform in that, then maybe we need to go in a different direction, and that was to maybe step aside as the chair and then allow someone who could do that. What Luke's saying this morning is not just the chair but off. That's new information, but it is something that was the CRA itself has asked for. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
May I ask a question? And I apologize, I was not part of the prior conversations, but is there not a vice chair on this board? And was that option discussed as a possibility?
Yeah, the option in the conversation we had was, given that where we're at with the board, I was opening up 2 nominations across all, and really start afresh.
But from a bylaws standpoint, does not the vice chair send to the chair upon the resignation of the chair?
It is not really clear, because I've read the bylaws. This is kind of one of the holes you would think that would normally be a succession, and that's why looking at it and saying, due to it not being as clear as possible, if the chair is not there, it states, then the vice chair would sit in. But as far as this situation, it's not really been covered. So that's why the suggestion was open it up as in case there's a changeover.
So I would also add that in your bylaws, Roman numeral 5 addresses officers. There is a subsection B, process for the election of chairperson and vice chairperson. It does say in number 5 that candidates, number 6, the CRAB may, by majority vote of all members, change any officer during the term of office. So I think it would just take a vote, and you could have a new chair if you so.
Yes.
Before we get there,
The process typically is nominations are open, and any and all can get nominated. And then once the nominations are there, then it's closed, and then the vote is to be done alphabetically. What we as council changed in our process, because at that point, it really is an advantage to someone being alphabetical versus, an A is much easier because you're voting first than a Z. We had opened it up and changed the process so that it's voted on all at once, meaning that if there's 2 or there's 3 people, then we actually have a ballot and we rank it 1, 2, and 3. And then the lowest number is the one that goes. Because that way you're taking out any of that alphabetical advantage, or you're taking out anything and making everyone vote at the same time. Because technically, if you're looking at it and you say if you have a member, Adam, and you vote 4 people, technically that person's won already. And then no one else gets a vote. which is not fair. So trying to get it so it's a logical flow. Okay. Any other questions for me?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
My question is, first off, I just want to preface everything that I'm about to ask and say, with my goal is to keep him sitting where he's sitting because he's a wealth of information and we don't want to see him go.
Yep.
Okay,
As
so
I
if
said,
this
that was
process,
new news.
if this process has forced him to go, and this is what's forcing him to go, rather than stay and remain the chair on this board for the remainder of his term, then my question to you is, why are you asking this of us now, when it has never been in my history here on this board? It's only occurred once where the chairman came and addressed you, and that person had not been a chairman for very long. I think only maybe in her first or second go-around meeting. Because Jason had been the chairman before that, and he never, while I sat in this chair over there, never appeared in front of you all. So I don't understand what the driving force is and the rationale to request us to come and stand in front of you at your meeting after we've sat in our meeting and gone through all this stuff. And as Luke has said, you can either watch it or you, like yourself, can sit in the back of the room, or you can trust Anita to fill you in.
Yeah, I just want to preface before you answer that it's not, this isn't an ultimatum for me by any means. That my decision's made. So it's not that I'm either staying or going to, I'm certainly would never give CRA or anyone an ultimatum about mine. I know it's time for me to step aside. It has nothing to do with, and Councilman McCabe and myself had a very open conversation in our meeting about time constraints for me and what that would require. And so that's a decision I've made on my own. That it contributes to it for sure, but I understand that, and Councilman McCabe has been very open that he wants to get this board, he wants to elevate this board and make it much more important to the CRA. So I just want to be clear about that. This is a decision I made. There's no, it's not an ultimatum by any means or anything like that.
Okay, well, I understand that, Luke.
Yeah.
But that's
And
still,
I
that's still
appreciate
within
that.
the confines of the discussion that I want to have with Mr. McCabe, because he's on the council. He is the vice mayor of the city. They don't ask the PAB, they don't ask Mr. Selfon or whoever happens to be chair at the time to come in front of them every time they have a meeting so that he can respond to them about questions from the PAB, because they have the exact same setup to where they can watch the PAB meetings. The PAB reports directly to them, and here's what we did. But they don't need to have Mr. Selfon walk in here and stand at the podium or be asked to stand at the podium for 5 minutes and reiterate it. Neither do they ask Mr. Ruby to come in here and do that, nor they ask Mr. Johnson from the code enforcement to come in here and do that. I don't know of any advisory board that they ask to come in, whoever the chairman of the Community Services Advisory Board. They don't ask them to come in here and do it. They ask us when they appoint us to these positions on this board to show up the day that we're supposed to be here. If you miss so many meetings in a row, you're automatically removed. And when your term expires, you can ask them, I would like to serve again in my second term, and they can decide whether they want you to serve in your second term. But to put another burden that's not even laid out, I don't think, in our bylaws on us is unfair, no matter who the chair of this organization is, or this advisory board. Whether it be somebody who just got on the board, or whether it's, in our case, Greg or me, to ask us to come here, on another day during the month to stand in front of them and reiterate and rehash exactly what they should know already. So, to me, I don't understand. It makes no sense to me.
Okay, right. And I can't speak for the other members of the CRA. It is and was a request from multiple members of the CRA, so I can't speak for them. All I can speak for, and there was more than one occasion that the prior chair came to the CRA, and it was so beneficial, and it was so positive. It was positive for both the crab in itself, and it was positive for the CRA board, and really added great dimensions to the conversations.
Well,
all I can say is, That's what led it. That's what was the benefit. And that is what the request was. And I
Was this a
appreciate
unanimous
Mr. Frederick's-
decision? Was this a unanimous decision by the CRA?
It was a request by the CRA. That's,
But was it just a consensus so that there were some that didn't
was a
think it's such a hot idea? Or was it all 7 of you all said, this is it, get them in here?
I think that what you had just said was exactly what it was. It was a consensus. We made the request, and it is not a large request. It is a 5 to maybe 10 minutes. And it is for the benefit of the city, and it is a benefit for which we are all trying to accomplish goals.
Okay, I understand that. But the time that Quinby stood up there, or sat in that chair, I think is where she was, and made her report to you all, I believe, and I voiced it at our next meeting, that I think she went outside the bounds of representing the 7 of us or 6 of us, whoever was on the board at that time, because she spoke only from her minority position on many items and made it sound like that was the position that we all should have taken.
Okay.
And I don't see how that enlightens you anymore.
And this is exactly what Luke and I have had conversations on. Then this is a good conversation for you to have. Because your chair represents you and is the chair. And in a presentation, the representation should be as such. If that wasn't the case, then that's the perfect conversation for you to have. And it's not something that you need to be having a conversation now with me. It's what you, as this board, needs to do. And as conversations we had, this board needs to do a lot more of the advising and ground up swell, which is what Ms. Dominic did today. And I think what the conversations that she put on the agenda should be put on the agenda for a greater conversations. And your conversations that you had earlier about parking spaces and allocations and how and what these dollar amounts are and why they are, that's exactly what this board is supposed to be doing. Having those conversations, making the recommendations to the CRA and saying, $7,550. When was that done? Why hasn't it been uplifted over the years? Is it make sense today, might make sense back? That's the conversations you have, and then get Anita to get the information at your next meeting to say, here's why. And you have the conversation to say it might have made sense then. It doesn't make sense now. Let's take it up. This is exactly what we need you guys to be doing.
Well, we're doing it. So what?
Exactly.
We're doing it. So why do we have to come and re-report it to you?
George, this is the request for the CRA. Okay?
Fine.
Okay? All right? Thank you.
I have a question. Was it ever put on the table that you stay and that some other member of the board be designated as the person to meet with the CRA?
Yeah, I didn't have any conversation about resigning from this board in our meeting with Mr. McCabe.
I see. So this is a surprise for everybody.
After I thought about, yes, nobody knew about this. This is after I thought about it. I like to think on things. So after I thought about it in our meeting, I made a decision that I think that it's time to move on, and my time needs to be spent elsewhere. So it's certainly not a, if we do this, I stay, that's my decision's made. So I want the best for this board and the best for the city. And so I made my decision based on those criteria alone. And so, you know, I grew up here. I love the city of Naples. I'm already on another board. And so with these additional requests, it's clear to me that I don't have the time to fulfill that request. Now, yes, that request wasn't a prereq on when you sign up for this board. However, I might not agree with the request, but I understand why the request is being made, and I understand why it might be helpful. Now, I completely forgot what George did mention when our previous chair did go, and I know there weren't many times, I couldn't tell you how many, but and George made a good point. We were a bit misrepresented, which is on this board to make sure that you elect a chair that you know is going to go and present or review with the chair, hey, what are you going to CRA on? I mean, the line's in the sand. This is a requirement for whatever chair you guys do elect, so you need to know that this is gonna be part of the, it's not for discussion, it's gonna happen, so, you know, it's probably gonna help, you know, communication always helps, but there isn't I mean, take me out of the equation as far as, you know, my decision's made, so I'm gonna step back and let you guys have your discussion on what chair. I'm not gonna speak on anything else and let you guys make your decision, because I don't wanna influence anybody's decision on who you elect or who's gonna move forward, so. But it has been a pleasure being on this board, and I appreciate it. It's just time to move on.
Do we even have quorum?
Well,
With resigning to be able to elect a new chair?
I would like to get some clarification, first of all. So now we have two issues before you. One is whether or not Mr. Frederickson is tendering a resignation, and the other is the issue that Vice Mayor McCabe brought up as chair of the CRA board. Will there be a member of this board reporting to that board? So whatever order you want to take those two items in, that would be fine.
I'd
Just
like to
let me
comment
know.
on the first one.
Yes.
This is my resignation, yes.
Okay.
So officially, I'm resigned from this board, and now I'm gonna step back and,
So you don't have to give us notice? I mean, we don't get like a
So do we have a quorum?
6 weeks notice or anything
I
like?
thought it best.
So, Ms.
you know, I
City
could have
Attorney, do
written
we have a
letter, and I
quorum?
thought it's always best to actually communicate that, and it's on record, it's on camera. There's no what happened here or there, this just happened here, and everybody can see it, and nobody
we do.
can twist it or whatever. It's right here, and everybody knows what happened, so I thought that the best way to deal with that.
I guess we got a quorum.
Okay. So,
So technically, we've got 6 members.
okay.
2 are absent, so we've got 4.
Okay, so in the absence of the chair, the vice chair generally will continue to conduct the meeting. And if you choose, you can wait for the other members to come to have the election for a new chair. You do have 4 members here today, which is a quorum. You could conduct business if you wanted to, and appoint that chair. My recommendation would be that you wait for the others.
But that would be September. I mean, that's all summer then without a chair, right? Isn't it?
The vice chair would be your acting.
Oh, the vice chair would be acting. Okay.
So we have 2 options, and if I'm the chair at the moment, acting chair, we can wait until September when we know that our other 2 members will be back, and maybe by that time we'll have filled that other spot, so we'll have a full 7 once again. Or we just elect a new chairman at this point. And I would suggest that we wait to elect a new chairman.
And just for clarification, you do have a meeting in August, not September.
Correct. And I will, as the acting chair, fulfill the request of the CRA at its next meeting, which is in August.
September.
They're not until September. Is that before or after our meeting?
After.
Okay, so I might not.
Yeah.
So that second issue then is going to be an open issue that will give you some time to think about it. And then also we can brief the members who are not present today.
Did we get an at-large, whatever the vacancy was for another member?
We have not.
Okay.
That was
So-
for an alternate.
So
And it
I
has
just
not.
need, I don't know if I need a consensus or if I need a vote as to how we're going to proceed.
Well, your rules are a little vague, but I would say that the vice chair would have the responsibility of acting in the absence of the chair. Your chair is resigned, so I think that responsibility is upon you. If any of the members present have any concerns or issues related to that, moving forward for at least the continuation of this meeting, it sounds like the next meeting will have more information and possibly some fulfilling the vacant position as well. So does anyone have any opposition to Mr. Donovan serving as, in his capacity as vice chair, to serve as interim chair.
No.
No.
Okay.
Okay, so that takes care of that order of business. So what does that bring us to now on our,
That completes the agenda for the day, Mr. Donovan.
okay, and
Mr. Acting Chair?
our next meeting then is going to be,
Motion to adjourn.
I
No,
think we
I have a
have,
question about dates.
before we gavel out, our next meeting is on July,
29th, or your next meeting is August 29th. You had canceled your July meeting due to vacations. You had also canceled this meeting, but decided to have this meeting, so you called this meeting. But previously, you had canceled the July meeting, so
Okay,
your
so-
next meeting would be August 29th.
29th.
our instructions are to circle your calendar for August 29th. And unless there's any other comments?
I have one thing. We're currently, I have a scheduled December 26th meeting. Can we make a decision about that, since that is actually a federal holiday, and I'd like to, either, people are going to be making plans.
Would you like to cancel that meeting now?
I'm asking the chairman for a record, yeah.
We can either cancel or we can discuss when we could have it somewhere else within the timeframe of December.
Why don't I bring your fall schedule to you at your August meeting, and you can review that and then make any adjustments to the full fall schedule?
Can we say that we're not going to have a meeting on December 26th?
On that particular date, I think it's safe to say we won't have a meeting.
Okay. Okay.
So with that, we're adjourned. Move that down there.